Welcome, everybody. We're coming to you from day 2 of the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. This is Patriots Draft Countdown presented by Bud Light. Bud Light, easy to drink, easy to enjoy, the official beer sponsor of the New England Patriots. And a lot going on today, Evan. We heard from Eliot Wolf. We heard from the defensive front seven, a really stacked position group here in this draft class, which I was excited about. Things got a little delayed at times, but otherwise it was pretty smooth sailing. A lot of appealing prospects to take a look at today.
Well, you just said it. I've been coming to the Combine a little bit now because I'm getting old, Deuce.
Me too.
And I haven't seen a delay like that often. And I was thinking to myself, what's going on? And we both were thinking. And I was like, oh, right, there's like 100 defensive linemen here. And so they were trying to crank them all through. I think it's 42 is the exact number. And, Eliot Wolf, we're going to get to him in a second. That was right off the bat. One of the things that he said is the strength of this class is the defensive line and the front seven talent. So whether the Patriots address it early with an Abdul Carter or something like that, or it's later on in the draft, there's starter caliber talent at all 3 days of the draft on the defensive front.
Pretty exciting. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's get right into Eliot Wolf. He spoke first at the podium, and then he came and joined us for a brief interview. So we're going to roll that right now, and there'll be plenty to talk about right after. All right, we're excited to be joined by Eliot Wolf. Now, Eliot, thanks for sitting down with us again. Second year in a row.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So you just set up at the podium. This is your 31st Combine. I'm just curious, what is a 14-year-old Eliot Wolf doing at the Combine? Are you going to Elmo's? Are you timing guys' 40s? What was that experience like for you as a kid?
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, obviously having the advantage of my father working in the business, like I was the spoiled brat that was running around here kind of doing whatever I wanted. So I would be with him, going to workouts, timing 40s. As I got a little bit older, I was a sandwich guy. I would go and get everyone sandwiches before they sold food in the dome. So, I kind of started at the bottom in that regard. But, I recorded the broad jumps for a number of years. Matter of fact, one year they lost the official recording, and I was the only person over there recording the broad jumps. So they actually used my records to get out to all the other teams. So it's been good, yeah.
Yeah, here we are 31 years later.
Yeah, right.
Just generally, how are things been going? Vrabel coming in and you kind of merging all that together, the processes and a new regime in place.
Yeah, it's been good. So I knew Mike a little bit beforehand, bumping into him at pro days. He was always the guy at the pro day. He had the big chest protector on, beating on linemen, trying to see how hard they hit. So I kind of knew him, but I had never had like a meaningful conversation with him until the interview process, and it's been really good. Like, he's so genuine and authentic. He has a vision for the team. None of it's fluff or BS. I'm really encouraged and excited to be working with him.
Yeah. Well, I'll let Evan grill you because we're ready to talk. We just want to talk prospects with you.
Yeah. I'll start with free agency, and then we'll get a little bit into the draft, though. Just with free agency, you often hear that you fill needs in free agency and you go best player available in the draft is like the old cliche. Do you adhere to that cliche or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a cliche. I mean, I think it gives you the most flexibility. The free agent class obviously has strengths and weaknesses, as does the draft. But the more holes you can fill in free agency and the more depth you can add to the roster, it gives you a little bit more flexibility.
When you look at number 4, you mentioned up at the podium earlier that not as much clarity. We've kicked this around that last year we kind of thought quarterback. Right now is a little bit more ambiguity there. What do you see with the number 4 overall pick in this draft at the top in terms of talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see. Again, not sure what's going to happen in front of us. Not sure what way we'll lean. Again, we have the whole free agency period, trades, all these other avenues to acquire talent. So we'll see what happens.
How much is it about patience? Because I feel like we look at all these big name free agents that are available, and you say, but then you could maybe go to the draft and get an edge there. And how much do you kind of get a plan? But I think, as you said on the podium, you have to be ready to kind of adjust and tack it to different course.
Yeah, it's absolutely all about adjusting. I mean, we may have someone right after I get off the podcast here that from another team that says, hey, this guy's available now, and it's about being prepared and open and ready to explore everything to improve the roster.
Obviously, you want to improve the roster everywhere, but are there a few positions in particular that you look at that say we really need to address these?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lines are the ones that stand out, offensive line, defensive line. And again, as I said at the podium, it's everyone talks about the Super Bowl, but Philadelphia's had a really good offensive and defensive line for a number of years. Kansas City has too. They just weren't able to get it done in the end. But again, it's all about the offensive and defensive line, and it has been for a long time.
Along those lines, we heard from the defensive line today, the linebackers, really good class, it seems like. From your perspective, how do you delineate? I mean, you have big space eaters inside. You've got penetrators. You've got guys who are really stout against the run on the edge, but maybe not pass rush yet. You got guys that are pure pass rush. there's just so many different flavors of guys in the front. I'm sure that the coaching staff has maybe a style that they're looking for as well. But how do you separate all that out?
Well, I mean, I think the one thing that Coach talks about a lot, and he's kind of drilled into the scouts so far, is just play demeanor. Like who's going hard, who's giving effort, who's running the ball, who's playing physical, who's willing to put their face on somebody, use their hands, counter, all those things. So that's just something that maybe separates whatever style they are, that separates them and makes them more attractive to us.
It's about the player, not the scheme. I mean, that seems, we talked to Mike yesterday, it just seemed like let's find the guys, then we'll kind of adjust to what we have.
Ultimately, I mean, there's probably a handful of players that wouldn't fit what the vision for the defense wants to be, but within that, it's about the players, and I feel confident in Mike, not that I've worked with him for a long time, but seeing what he did in Tennessee and Terrell Williams with the D-line, like a lot of those guys would improve, just as a scout watching those guys. So we're confident that they'll be able to make whoever we bring in work.
When you look at the market and start talking about wide receivers and that coverage dictating number one guy, what do you see available out there? Do you feel like you guys can address that and maybe bring one of those types of players in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about getting good players. Like, I don't know that, how many players are going to be available that fit the bill that you're talking about. But again, there's plenty of areas to improve, and that would be one of them.
You mentioned some of the depth that I think the offensive line and wide receiver positions kind of in the middle of the draft. Is it hard to count on those guys? Are those, when you're getting to that, late day 2, early day 3, are you just trying to get guys you like their traits, but is it hard to count on those guys to really come in and make an instant impact?
I think so. I think it can be tough to count on those guys from day one. Again, it's about, the draft isn't judged in 1 year, but, to say that we're not going to fill this need because we'll just pick a guy in the 5th round, like, I don't think that's very realistic.
All right, so what's Eliot Wolf's official stance on arm length?
My official stance on arm length is it's a tool, just like any tool that we use to, again, it all comes back to the film. So, and I know, Mike said this, but Coach Belichick was big on this too, is like there's plenty of guys that have long arms, but they play like this. Yeah. And the guys that can maximize their length, and to me, when you're writing a scouting report, it's more advantageous. Like, you can write that a guy has good length, but the extension, the punch that he plays with is more important than the actual number.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just with Travis Hunter, I wanted to ask you about him specifically because I find it so fascinating that is it almost like evaluating 2 separate players because he can play 2 different positions? Like, how do you kind of scout him?
It is, and not to give anything away, but Matt Groh actually wrote 2 separate scouting reports on him when he went to Colorado this year. He has one wide receiver report, one corner report. Now, he's the only one that did that. Everyone else kind of tried to jam everything into the space that we had. But it's tough when you're talking about a player that does so many different things to try to fit it all in there.
You try to match it up, like how would Travis Hunter, the receiver, do against Travis Hunter, the cornerback?
Exactly.
Well, Ev, I don't want to cut it. If you got any more in the
no,
bag,
that's all
you got.
Right. I'm good.
No, we love this stuff. We love the combine. Good. We love seeing all these players. So thanks for sitting down and providing some insight with us.
All right, no problem. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eliot.
Thanks. All right, so great stuff from Eliot. Our 2nd year in a row. We got to chat with him. 41 years at the combine. That's pretty crazy. This is 31. My 5th year. 31. Sorry, 31. I didn't mean to get too much, but this is my 5th, and it's already feeling like a lot. But Evan, what stood out to you most? I mean, some great nuggets in there from Eliot.
Yeah, there were great nuggets. I think the biggest thing, he said the trenches on both sides of the ball when we asked him about offseason needs. And I always think that's interesting. Like, we talk a lot about offseason needs, but is that really how they talk, So that's why I threw that question at him. And he said the line of scrimmage, and he was quick to say it's not just the Super Bowl. Like, this is football, right? That's where it's won and lost. And we'll get to some of the prospects today that talked at the podium on the defensive line. But that's a big part of this offseason for both head coach Mike Vrabel and Eliot Wolf is we need to nail the trenches, and it's a great place to start. I mean, that's where it starts.
That's where football games are won, folks. At least that's what they tell me.
Yeah.
Just to point out, though, when Eliot did go up to the podium, which you can watch that full podium session as well on Patriots.com. Really just accepting responsibility. Not good enough last year. 4 wins. Didn't get enough out of the draft class. I thought some interesting things about Jalen Polk. Felt like maybe they put too much on him. Again, a guy that even we're kind of conflicted on him, I feel like, because I really liked him when I first started, and then I think when they took him where they took him, I was a little bit like, I don't know about that. But even saying that he felt like Layden Robinson maybe played a little bit more than they thought he would have to. I mean, interesting nugget there as well. So I don't think that they've abandoned all hope on that draft class, and I certainly haven't either. As I've said on Patriots Unfiltered, they could just get one of those guys between Caden Wallace and Layden Robinson, or even some of the guys from the earlier years, City So. They could just get contribution to have them lock down one spot. I think they'd be in a pretty good spot then to go and hopefully in free agency in the draft add even more talent to that offensive line.
Right. I think one of the answers that he gave was about how they didn't do enough in free agency and then the draft. And I think that's a way to put it, because free agency to me is your floor of your roster. Like, how do you get enough players in here that are NFL starting caliber type of players so that when you get to the draft, you're just drafting best player available and stacking real talent at the top of the board, especially like where the Patriots are. So when you look at the Patriots last season, it felt like in the offseason they left the door open that the draft was going to kind of have to come in and rescue the day, right? Like, it was going to
it's a tough spot to be.
The quarterback was going to have to hit. They were going to have to hit on a top flight wide receiver. They're going to have to hit on a left tackle, because all these things kind of slipped through the cracks for them in free agency. So looking at it this time around, my expectation is to follow more of that Commanders model of let's go out and get like 8 to 10 guys that we know can play in this league at this level. And yeah, maybe the tackle we sign isn't going to be the next Joe Thomas, and he's not going to be a Hall of Famer. But we'll go in the draft, and we'll draft for upside, and we'll draft for talent, and hopefully we can develop a long-term solution at some of these positions in the draft.
The other thing I got to bring up, great question from you just about Travis Hunter, and nice little nugget there from Eliot about them, writing up 2 separate scouting reports for Travis Hunter. That's a really cool way to kind of go about it. I mean, it just illustrates what a special player he is. I'm sure if he were to fall to 4, it seems to me like that would be pretty much a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Berry, the Browns GM yesterday, said that he views him as a wide receiver. The Titans general manager said a corner. Eliot said that he could play both ways, he thinks, in the NFL. There's a scenario there. So there's all different answers across the board of where he best fits. And I love that nugget. I mean, I think that's fascinating, that you basically have to treat him as 2 separate players and look at it that direction. And it's going to be so interesting to me when we talk to Travis Hunter later this week. What's his message? Like, is he locked down to one position, or at least majoring in one position already? He's going to work out with the corners, the defensive back, so maybe that's a little bit of a tea leaf of where this is headed. But I do think there are people that believe that he can be a better wide receiver, or at least be a good enough wide receiver that it's worth it to pay him on that side of the ball.
So he's one of 2 big names at the top of the draft that we always kind of talk about. It's him and Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter kicked things off this morning bright and early, 8 a.m. We were here to hear from Abdul Carter. Thing I've noticed, Evan, this being my 5th combine, is some guys just project. You're like, this is a dude who can play in the league. And even if you didn't ever watch him play, you could probably walk through here and be like, yeah, he can play. And certainly Abdul Carter just gave that vibe off of a dude who can play and who's going to help a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the tape speaks for itself with him. I mean, he's a fantastic athlete. I think the one thing that you look at when you watch a guy like Abdul Carter is you want to see the guys that move differently. And he's just one of those guys that just moves differently. He's a different breed of athlete than a lot of other players in this draft in particular. But I thought was really interesting from what he said is that his favorite player that he tries to emulate his game after is Von Miller. He gets a lot of Micah Parsons comparisons, number 11, Penn State, like that whole thing. But he seems to feel like he more looks like Von Miller. Like that's who he tries to emulate his game after. So I thought that was interesting because I can definitely see that comparison as well.
Let's talk about some of these other guys. I got to mention, I've brought them up before, but the 2 Georgia guys, again, they just have the vibe of dudes who can play in the league. I'm talking about Michael Williams and Jalen Walker.
Yep.
They all sound the same. I mean, there's like Trayvon Walker a couple years ago. Now we had Jalen Walker.
Yeah.
But those 2 guys to me, and different guys,
I
feel, and even Michael Williams said he felt like he's more of a defensive end, probably more of a hand down, that kind of a player, whereas Jalen Walker saying, hey, where do you want me to play? You want me to play in the slot? You want me to play off the edge and off the ball, wherever they need to put him? And it's a pipe dream of mine, but I'm like, I just stick those 2 guys on the defense right now for the Patriots. They fit in great, but those 2 guys really stood out to me. And as I think Philadelphia proved in the Super Bowl, you can't go wrong drafting guys from Georgia.
Yeah, so Jalen Walker, I think, is a top 5 player in this class. He's a tremendous talent, and what I love so much about him is that he can play in all situations from various alignments. He said he's played 4 different positions in the Georgia defense. So he can play off-the-ball linebacker, edge rusher, inline rusher, nickel. Like, he can just play anywhere. and as a matchup player, as a down and distance situational player as well. And when you have a head coach like Mike Vrabel, that you feel good about using a player like that and knowing how to implement his talents, you feel good about a player like that for the Patriots. Mykel Williams, I think, is interesting too, just because of Terrell Williams, the Patriots defensive coordinator. His background is in developing defensive linemen. It's in aggressive defensive linemen and coaching those guys up and all that kind of stuff. And Mykel Williams right now is a ball of clay. He's a little raw. His hand technique and his hand fighting needs some work, and he kind of needs a plan when he rushes the passer that he doesn't have right now. But every 5 plays, you just see him do something freaky, where you're just like, okay, well, there it is. Last thing on him, the Georgia defensive front, they play a lot of 5 technique, as we know around here, defensive end, so straight up over the tackle. And when you play over the tackle, you're not going to get as many sacks as the guys that are playing from the 7 or the 9 technique all the way outside. Yeah. So they don't necessarily have defensive ends in that system that put up gaudy sack totals in college. Like Trayvon Walker's another one that had modest production at the college level, like Mykel Williams. A lot of that is because of the role and the style of defense. It's actually pretty Belichickian the way that Kirby Smart plays defense. So that you have to take that into account too. If you're going to draft a guy like Mykel Williams and you're going to put him at wide 9 in a 4-3 all game long and just let him tee off, he's going to have a different level of production than he did at Georgia.
They want to stick in the SEC, I guess. Texas A&M. But Shamar Stewart and Nick Scarton are 2 guys that I've really gravitated towards early on watching those guys, and both really impressed me today as well. I think, again, those are different guys, and especially with Scarton, he's just so disruptive. I mean, he's just a big dude, and again, a little raw, seems like you need to rein him in maybe a little bit. But when you have these needs along the defensive line with the Patriots, and as Eliot said, it's hard not to look at every one of these guys that really looks like they're making an impact and say, Come to New England. We need these kind of guys.
Yeah, so Shamar Stewart is going to be an unbelievable tester.
I'm naming all first-round picks, by the way. We're not getting these guys.
We can get into the day 2 and 3, you know that. But he's going to be an unbelievable tester. Yeah. And there are some people, you read some of these guys like Dane Brugler and stuff like that assume that after he works out tomorrow night, all of a sudden the top 10 buzz is going to start. And just to go back to Trayvon Walker for a second, this is sort of when that started for him, number 1 overall pick. I don't know if Stewart's going to get all the way up there, but it just sounds like to me that this is going to be a freaky 99th percentile combine athlete that everybody's going to be like, holy crap, why, this guy's got an immense ceiling. So we'll see with that. With Scorton, he's just a ball on fire, right?
Awesome.
He's a speed to power, aggressive, downhill, bring your lunch pail, type of guy. And that's obviously very attractive too. What I like about him as well is that you can move him around the defensive front. He's not going to be just somebody that plays on the edge. I love, the old high tower line up over the guard or center, use your quickness on the inside. I think Scorton can do that sort of thing.
2 more guys I just want to bring up. Mike Green, we heard from him as well, and James Pierce. Similar kind of guys, edge rush types. But again, I think it just illustrates the depth of this class and how many different options there are, even as you get down, into the late first round. And maybe that is an option for the Patriots. Trade back up, and try to grab one of these guys. It's one question we didn't get to ask Eliot. I got to make a note to ask him next time. But, when you have these deep classes like this, do you strike early and get the best one of the group, or do you say there's a bunch of them, we like them all? Yeah, it's just it's a hard way to kind of balance things.
It is, and I find myself going back and forth on it too, because we'll probably get to Mason Graham here in a second as well. It's those are great players at the top, but the drop off at tackle or the drop off at wide receiver might be a lot bigger from first round to second round. So Will Campbell to, let's just use names, to Ariante Ursary might be a much bigger drop-off than Mason Graham to, one of the guys we've been talking about here on the defensive line. So that's something that I do think you have to weigh a little bit, because there are going to be starters in day 2 on the defensive line. There might not be starters on day 2 on the offensive line, especially at left tackle.
Let's talk about Mason Graham now, because I think I kind of polarizing. I'm feeling like that's what it is. Although I don't really
differing opinions from maybe somebody named No Sauce. I don't know if he's around here.
I mean, look, he's not Keon White. He doesn't have the Keon White first off the bus kind of look to him. That vibe of like, oh man, this is a scary football team coming at us. But anybody who watches him knows like he can play. He's a fast player, and when you hear what Eliot Wolf is saying about what Terrell Williams values, what Mike Vrabel values, it's about disruption. It's about guys who play fast and aggressive. And Mason Graham, even though he might not look it when he's standing up there at podium, that's kind of what he does. So it's, on one hand, it's easy to make a case, and on the other hand, you look at all these other guys and you're like, yeah, but there's other edge guys or other interior guys that, and actually I got to take that back because I think he's kind of stands alone as far as an interior guy. But, edge guys off the ball, there are some other options later. I don't know. I think he's a really interesting guy that we're going to be talking a lot about these next few months.
Yeah, when we talk about number 4, we always bring up blue chip prospects. And some of the people that we've talked to here have said that he should be considered a blue chip prospect. I was kind of surprised about that. We have Jordan Reed coming up here later in the week, and he feels that way about Mason Graham. So he's one of those players that if Bill Belichick was still drafting for the Patriots, I feel like he would be the guy because he's not going to be the first off the bus guy. He's not going to win the combine. He's not going to do any of the flashy things that we kind of get attracted to sometimes this time of year and overrate, frankly, this time of year a little bit. He's going to be good on tape, and he's going to be quiet, and he's going to go about his business, and he's going to work hard, a lot like Christian Gonzalez or Keon White or somebody like that. Now, I don't know if Vrabel will gravitate towards that same style of player, because I agree on film, effort and finish were the two big things that they preach with this new regime, and he checks both those boxes in spades. Like that's what his game is all about. But do I look at him and say that's a franchise pillar, a leader of the organization for the next decade, that sort of thing? No, but it's also probably unfair to put that on him.
Yeah.
So.
Who else have I missed here today? Anybody else that we want to talk about? I mean, it is a talented class, and we touched a lot on like the top guys, which, let's face it, maybe they get Patriots without a shot at one of these of these guys we're talking about, unless they trade down. But anyone else I missed, or anyone else of this group that stands out to you?
Just a couple of the linebackers I thought were really impressive. Jihad Campbell from Alabama is a guy that's really fascinating to me. I think he's going to be a really good athlete, a really good tester here, and he's got great tape, but it's streaky. Some games is better than others, but I think he's got a lot of those same Patriot-style linebacker traits where he can kind of do a little bit of everything. He has the size and the play strength and the speed to power to play the run and fill gaps and come downhill at the line of scrimmage, but he can also cover and play in space. He can rush the quarterback. He can spy the quarterback. And although I understand we're all thinking offense, defensive line, wide receiver one, all those different type of things, having that playmaking linebacker at the second level, I don't know if they necessarily have that either, right? Somebody that can truly go sideline to sideline or chase down a mobile quarterback. When Josh Allen goes to scramble and, now it's first down, so you have your run personnel on the field and you're trying to get guys that are 250, 255 pounds to chase down Josh Allen. This is a guy that's a really, really good athlete. The other one, Jeffrey Bossa from Oregon. I think that he's another guy that really stood out to me at the podium and on film as well as a coverage linebacker. He used to play safety. Now he's going to play linebacker, off-ball linebacker in the league. He's talking about Fred Warner, of course, is kind of like the poster child for that sort of thing. And I think if you're looking for somebody that can run the seam and cover two and carry tight ends vertical and do all that good stuff, then he's somebody like that.
Yeah, that's a lot coming at us today, and a lot of draft stuff. So we're glad to share a bunch of that draft stuff, the Eliot interview as well. But we also had a chance to sit down with Mike Reiss of ESPN, of course. That needs no introduction. Yes. The legend, Mike Reiss himself, to really just drill down on some of the Patriots stuff. So you can check out that interview right here. All right, we're excited to be joined by Mike Reiss of ESPN. Mike, thanks for sitting down with us here at the Combine.
Mike, Evan, great to be with you.
Needs no introduction.
I know, needs no introduction.
Yeah.
I said it might have been like back the old blogger podcast days, the last time we had like you for a one-on-one conversation. So thank you for that back in the day. But just to start off, Mike, I know you covered Mike Vrabel for a long time as a player. What have you seen from him the first few months here as a coach?
So I feel like a lot of energy, a lot of clear vision on what he wants to do. And I think the experience stands out to me. This is someone that's done it before, knows the steps to take, and it's been sort of refreshing. Is the word that I would use.
Yeah. What was your experience like just covering him as a player? I mean, a lot of reporters have great stories about covering Mike Vrabel.
Yeah.
But what was it like for you?
So let's start with where his spot was in the locker room, right? Because that's the first thing that I think about is when we would all be gathered around. So he would have been where Christian Ellis is. So for those who are listening or watching this is down close to where Teddy Bruschi used to be. that's the corner locker going into like the meeting room.
Right where Jawan Bentley is.
Jawan Bentley
Yeah.
in that area. So, and we would gather around, and you had to be, let's see, not sensitive when you were gathered around Mike Vrabel. You had to be ready for the quick wit, and I would say not much has changed now that we're back to it, and he's the coach.
It's absolutely true. One of the things I was wondering with Vrabel here, obviously they have all this cap space. They had a lot of cap space last offseason. We saw how that went, trying to attract free agents to come here. In your experience knowing Mike, like, do you feel like he can be a great recruiter of some of the talent that maybe is out there and try to sway people to actually come to New England? Because let's face it, right now I think being a destination is something they're struggling with a little bit.
So I do think he can be that. And for those that are watching us, we should let them know that the last question that Mike took in our gathering after the press conference on Tuesday was Evan talking about being a recruiter. And Mike told the story. I don't know if he told it when he was on with you guys about how he was at Houston.
Yeah.
And Houston had some natural grass in their dome. And Mike Vrabel, who's an assistant coach, says to Bill O'Brien, what do you have this natural grass in the dome for? And Bill O'Brien goes, I think it would be great for recruiting free agents. And Vrabel says to Bill O'Brien, the only green that free agents care about is the cash. So I think the cash is, to use that story, the cash is the great recruiter, but in a tiebreaker, Mike Vrabel can be a great salesperson. And I think it's genuine, Evan. Like, I do think it's genuine.
Yeah, I think that was one of the takeaways that I had just listening to him talk. If you are looking for that tiebreaker, this is an intense guy. And this is a guy that you could see yourself as an athlete playing for, and not to say that other coaches couldn't maybe do the same thing, but there's just between him and really Drake May, like I feel like those are the two things, and money obviously, that they have going for them right now. So it's been interesting to see how he can kind of talk and has that gravitas and a little bit of that just appeal from a player perspective.
And I think the other thing, if it works out in the Patriots' favor, that they have going for them is the culture that he had established in Tennessee. So if players hear about that, and that, like, so Taylor Lewan, right? Like, I'm sure you followed him on X and his stories about that. Will Compton, right? Correct me if I slip up here. These are players that had experienced it, that are out there in the public, talking about what they got out of it, even if they might have been a little skeptical at the start, right? And so that can also be something, a player that wants to be part of that culture. How about for us? Like, I know with Mike, I better be sharp when I'm coming. I better have my questions ready. Like, so just as it's like hopefully raising your game as a reporter, someone covering the team, you want to raise your game as a player. Like, this might be a guy you want to align with.
Mike, we get so caught up in free agency coming up and T. Higgins and Ronnie Stanley and the big names, and then you slowly start to hear, well, these guys are going to re-sign, or, and then you talk about the draft, and we talk about Abdul Carter, and there's just a lot of names that you get excited about. But throwing all the names apart, what does this Patriots team need? I mean, what do they need to add personnel-wise, whether it's free agency, the draft? When you get out of this spring, what do you want to see this team pick up?
Well, I feel like the line of scrimmage would be where I would start. If you and if Ronnie Stanley comes available to me, Evan, we were talking about this. Like, that would be a great one to just say, oh, bam, left tackle, squared away, taken care of. And I thought one of the things Mike said that I liked, that I agree with, the Super Bowl was won at the line of scrimmage. I think the Patriots are weak at the line of scrimmage right now, and that's where I would start.
Yeah, he mentioned, too, that they wanted to try to use free agency so that they can get to the draft and just take the best player available, not have to necessarily reach on a player like that. We talked a little bit about Ronnie Stanley last night and him potentially being available. I think the Ravens are obviously interested in keeping him, so see where that goes. Just do you have a sense at all, though, of some of the names that might actually get to free agency that you would be interested in?
So, well, Ronnie Stanley would be at the top of my list. Milton Williams would be another. I think the thing on that is, what is the number? Right. Would it go over Christian Barmore? Should it go over Christian Barmore? That would be the next one on my list. I don't still considering Josh Sweat. And if that would be a fit. To be honest, even at the lower financial level, I mean, would you consider Judon coming back?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying I would, but like just names like that that I've thought about, and pretty much almost every one is at the line of scrimmage. Another one, I like Stephon Diggs.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a Diggs fan. I don't know what the financial level on that would be, but I'd consider looking into that one myself.
Yeah. What about when you look internally at this team? And Vrabel got some questions today about scheme changes and all those kind of things, but you know, do you look at this team as it is right now? And he said it today. He said the team's going to look very different at the end of August. Do you think that there's some maneuvering to be done on the roster, that guys that are already here, guys that are under contract?
Meaning that they might not be around?
Perhaps. I mean,
Yeah.
I think any coach comes in, he's got to adjust things, and certainly a lot of those players connect back to Bill, and you would think like tough, versatile players. Everybody's kind of in the market for those, but at the same time, Mike's got his own philosophies that he's going to come in with, and I don't think anything needs to happen immediately, but it feels like they really need to take inventory of who we have and who are the guys that we're going to move forward with.
I think so, and also how they're going to play. So
Yeah.
you applying this conversation, one thing Mike Vrabel said that stood out to me, Terrell Williams is a very aggressive defensive coach. So when I hear that, well, the defense is going to be playing differently than it has in the past. So what does that mean for Dietrich Weiss, free agent?
Yeah.
What does that
Yeah.
mean for Jonathan Jones? Mike Vrabel's talking about how important the nickel position is in today's game. Like,
Is that Marcus
is
Jones?
That Marcus Jones? Is it
Right.
Jonathan Jones? Is it someone else? Maybe it's. I'm not saying DJ Reed would be a slot, but
Yeah.
does that make a corner? If some of your other options in free agency that maybe are at the line on the lines don't work out, maybe you redirect the money. So, I think that's where my mind is racing, is how they'll play differently on defense. I think offensively, they just need players, no matter what the scheme is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that nickel spot is interesting because I think a lot of teams nowadays are going to more like safety body types in the nickel instead of true corners, because with all these like Shanahan-inspired offenses, you have the wide zone teams going outside the numbers and trying to run to the numbers, and if you're going to do that, like, you need to set the edge of the defense and force the ball back inside. So instead of having a guy like Jonathan Jones or Marcus Jones who's undersized and isn't really going to be able to do that, you have more like C.J. Gardner-Johnson types that can actually push the ball back inside to the defense. So when he says nickel and he starts talking about the importance of, is that guy a good blitzer? Is that guy, can he do different things? Can he cover, but can he do other things? That's sort of the thing I was thinking about a little bit was, okay, 5'8" Marcus Jones, 5'9" Jonathan Jones. Is that really what he's looking for in that spot?
Really, really good discussion.
Yeah, wonder about Marty Mapu too. Not necessarily in that role, but just another guy who's been kind of, I don't want to say miscast, but you haven't really found a home for him yet. And he came out of nowhere last year, that first game back, played like the whole game. We're like, where's this guy been? And tapered off a little bit. But I wonder if there's a different spot for him when we talk about maybe linebacker position, getting more mobile, when you look at what they did in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Just a lot of questions. I mean, that's for the thing with Mike. He played under Belichick here, never really coached under Belichick, worked a lot with Romeo Crennel and Dean Pease and guys off of that tree, still kind of did his own thing in Tennessee. And I think that's like our question, which we'd asked him a little bit about it. He didn't really get into it too much. But how's it going to change? How's it going to evolve? And I think, as you said, that defense just seems like it's a piece of clay right now, and that they're going to have to mold it into something different.
And I love to take viewers and listeners inside, right? So just sort of on the same topic but different topic. One of the thoughts I came into this combine with was, will Vrabel commit to Mike Onwenu at guard or tackle? So we remember Bill Belichick. He's a guard. Like, that's where his body type is. I do think there's some people in the front office that say, Onwenu's not bad at tackle. Like, if you look at some of the PFF numbers, they're sort of stack up pretty good at tackle. And I don't know if that's actually true, Evan. You might be able to confirm that. But so today, I'm like, let me take a try. I mean, I'm used to this with Bill Belichick.
Right.
I mean, I know the answer is probably going to be, Mike, it's, it's February.
Just trying to get the best
February
players.
25th. I mean, the next time we play a game, it's September. So let's see how Mike might answer it. And that one got swatted down pretty good, right? But he did say, I had a good conversation with Mike Onwenu.
Yeah.
Seems like he wants to, we can improve on some things. And work on, being part of this. So it was just sort of interesting, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about how things are changing, scheme-wise, media-wise, but took a stab at that one.
Yeah, with Onwenu, I feel like the best thing for him is to play him at guard. And right now I feel like he's been a decent right tackle for what else they've had on the roster, right? And that's not necessarily what's best for him, but it might have been what was best for the Patriots in that moment in time. But every time they kind of play some of those higher level pass rushers, he's had some issues playing outside. I remember a couple years ago, Khalil Mack just had a monster game with him playing at right tackle, one of the worst games I've seen Onwenu play as a Patriot, and I just feel like he's better suited at guard. But like all this conversations about roster, brings me to the next question, which is who has final say on this roster? Because Vrabel was asked point blank who has final say today, and he kind of deflected on it, I felt like, and he didn't really give a straight answer.
Definitely. One last thing on Onwenu before answering that is my thought was, well, if he would commit to him at tackle, is Trey Smith now be, you want to start, want to start getting quality starters in there. But I'm with you, Evan. I think guard. Guard would be the ideal scenario. Who has final say? So here's what I believe.
Yeah.
Contractually, what is written on the paper, Eliot Wolf has the final say. That is what he had signed on this contract last year, is what I understand. However, Mike Vrabel, being hired as coach, comes in and is probably not going to take that job if he doesn't have assurances that he's going to have players that he doesn't want, right? And so I think there's a little bit of nuance to this where if Eliot wanted to put his foot down and said, no, we're taking this guy because I think he's the best and I don't care that you don't want him and this is the way it's going to be, I don't believe that marriage would, I don't think that's what Eliot would do, but if we're going to go by the letter of the law, Eliot would probably not be around much longer, would be my take. So I think they'll work it out. Technically it's Eliot, but I do believe it'll be significantly influenced by what Mike wants. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Last one for me, Mike, just, thoughts on the draft. Here we are at the Combine, getting a look at some of these guys. I know at 4, I've said a couple times, at 3, it felt like last year pretty straightforward. We know they're probably going to take a quarterback. 4, feels like, there's a couple guys, Carter, Hunter, they got through. You'd probably slam dunk them, but otherwise it gets to be kind of curious, not sure which way. Can we trade down and maximize and not overdraft anybody? And it seems like those are the conversations we're having this year.
Yeah, what I look for as a reporter, I feel like Evan's studied it a lot more than me. Mike, you probably studied it a little bit more than me, is you just look for consensus among people that have studied it. And I don't sense it outside of Carter and Hunter.
Yeah.
And it makes me think, quite honestly, is that winning that last game really hurt this franchise, just to be honest.
Yeah.
And so is there a way that maybe between now and the draft, those quarterbacks start to how we view them now changes and 2 of them end up within the first 3 picks? I think would be the best scenario for the Patriots. And then you just take the other guy, Carter or Hunter.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's probably my big picture takeaway now on the draft.
Yeah, it's a tough one because, I think the next 2 best prospects are probably Mason Graham and Will Campbell, but both of those guys have some flaws to their games that don't make them quite that high-level prospect. The name that always gets thrown around to me with defensive tackles is like Quinnen Williams when he came out. He was a surefire, this guy's gonna be like a decade-long Hall of Fame level talent in the league. And I don't think Mason Graham quite is at that level, whereas I don't think Campbell's quite at Joe Alt's level in terms of the tackle position. Before we let you go, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here.
Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't asked you? Any scoops, any Mike Reiss info that you can share with us?
Well, so good. I love this on the draft. So let's say the 2 quarterbacks don't go, within the first 3 picks, and a team wants to come up for it. I think given the whole discussion we've had, the idea of moving back and getting another one for next year, I would probably endorse that today as a good move for the organization. So that's sort of the big picture on that. And other stuff here in terms of scoops, or not scoops, but just stuff around
anything you're hearing
around the Patriots. Trying to think. Alex Austin's one, like, I want to hear about, because we saw that we're going deep, but we go
Yeah,
deep
that's
what
on
we
this.
do.
You know, Jeremiah Farm signed the 2-year
Yep.
as the exclusive rights free agent, which basically was him giving up the restricted free agent year next year. I'm curious what Alex is going to do, and I think there's probably some discussion there as to how to handle that.
Yeah.
Does he just want to take this year as an exclusive rights free agent and roll it into restricted free agency, or could they somehow reach something that maybe is in the middle where he's willing to give up restricted free agency, become unrestricted a couple years from now? Because I think fairly promising player. Could be a...
Thought he came on at the end last
Yeah.
year. I mean, a little bit of a decision to make maybe with Jonathan Jones as a free agent, and
Yeah.
Austin can maybe play on the outside a little bit.
Yeah, I
that
feel
was-
like we've been clamoring for size opposite Gonzalez, right? Because somebody that can actually play full-time on the perimeter, and I think he's done a nice job when given the opportunities and when healthy and all that kind of stuff. And Vrabel talked about let's not go to the draft with all these needs. And if they don't bring Austin back and they don't bring Jonathan Jones back, now all of a sudden perimeter corner is a pretty big need. And so now you have another need to fill, right? And so that's a tough one to be in. That's a good one.
And another thing that he said that I particularly liked was on SiriusXM NFL radio, he talked about last year's draft class. And I think because outside of Drake, you didn't get much from the draft class. Is that fair to
Yep.
say? And I think we have a tendency, or at least I do, to just write those players off. Jalen Polk, Caden Wallace, Javon Baker, Layden Robinson, probably to a lesser degree. I mean, he gave you something, but well, he used the word revitalizing that draft class, and I do think there's something to that. Like, did they just draft bad players, or was there something that happened? And Vrabel talking about how he spoke to those players and said, we hear about the sophomore slump, but let's call this the freshman 15. And I thought that was really good, because so much, it's not, you don't just draft a player and that player's great in your system. You draft them and develop them. And so I think what he's talking about, I believe in, and I want to see how they do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. Well, Mike Reiss, thanks for joining us, Mike.
Great to be here, guys.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap up day 2, I guess. These
was a
days are
meaty
going to
one.
start to blend together a little bit, but we got cornerbacks, safeties on tap tomorrow. We'll finish out the defensive side of the ball. Anything you're looking for tomorrow? Not huge positions in need, but I think you always could be in the market for a cornerback, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, Travis Hunter's going to talk, so that in itself is going to be worth the price of admission. I mean, this is such a unique player, and I just come back to what Eliot said about the Patriots writing up 2 separate reports about him, one at corner, one at receiver. I've never seen anything like that or heard of anything like that before. So fascinated to see when he gets to the podium, what position does he want to play? He's going to get grilled about it, right? And does he say, I want to play both ways? Don't draft me unless you're going to play me both ways. Or is he going to favor one position or the other?
Yeah. Well, Travis Hunter Thursday coming up tomorrow. Of course, we'll be back here with the podcast to get you guys caught up on everything that goes down here at the Scouting Combine.